Hey, I'm Kenneth Wajda. I'm a professional photographer here in Colorado. Welcome to another one of my photo chats. So today I want to talk about what you can get with an ask. So I was traveling last month across the country from Colorado to Washington, D.C. for a photo shoot. And I'd like to drive that route because I can scoot up to Pennsylvania and go see my family during this shoot time. And I can bring a full studio to this client that I'm working for in DC, and I can bring more equipment than I typically could fly with. So it's a little bit of a treat. Plus I get a road trip in, I get to see the country, I get to photograph along the way. And you never know what photo exhibits you might find in different cities that you're stopping at. And that was the case this time. I was in Champaign, Illinois for a night, and I actually made it so that I would drive a long drive and then I would stay an extra day in a town so I wouldn't be just driving every day. I wasn't in that big of a hurry. I scheduled it so I'd have some downtime so I could poke around towns. And I was in Champaign, Illinois, and the neighboring town is Urbana, Illinois, and the two of them are a fun little area to hang out for a couple of days. And I went to the Google and I said, hey, any photo exhibits in Champaign, Urbana? And the first result was the Urbana Museum of Photography. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, I am so there. It's a gallery and a museum of analog photography. And when does it open? It opens tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock. I'm not going to be here. I'll be getting on the road tomorrow morning early. So I said, And there's a link that took me to their Facebook page. And the Facebook page had a message button, and I hit a message button and said, hey, I'm a photographer, I'm traveling across the country, and I'm here now. Is there anybody who could let me in, or is anybody going to be there that could let me in today? And I got a response immediately from the owner who said, yeah, what time do you want to come by? And I said, I can be there in a half hour. He said, yeah, I'll be there. And it was such a wonderful thing to have doors open because I asked. And I went to the location, and it's an old newspaper building. It's called the Courier Cafe on the lower portion because it used to be the Courier newspaper. And the lower portion, the newsroom, I suppose, has been changed into a cafe. And then there's a set of stairs. And upstairs, the old photo department and the dark room had been sitting unused, and the owner now has said, I'm just going to ask if I can get access to it. I guess he rents it out now. And he's got a dark room, he's got a studio, he's got a scanning room, he's got a storage room, and he's got a gallery. And in that gallery, he had hand printed some negatives that were a part of the Courier's archive, including JFK's visit to the area during a campaign stop, some Rolleiflex square photos from the press room. That was the press room of that newspaper back then. And the walls were lined with these hand-printed black and white photographs that he makes there. And he had an assistant working, doing some scanning. He said they do, some portrait work, they do some scanning work, and all of that work is on display at a museum in a little town, Urbana. And I got to see it because I asked. And then after looking at the photographs and doing a tour of the different rooms of the space that he has, which I really like, we sat down and we talked photography a little bit, talked about what we both like to do, and it was just such a great visit. I spent an hour there, I think, and really connected with another photographer who has a passion for analog, and myself and my passion for analog. And because I asked, I got to go. And because I asked and got to go, I ended up with a camera. What? Before I left, he said, hey, see those cameras in the corner? Are you handy? And I said, no, not really. And he's like, if you would want one of those, there's 2 5x7 cameras over there, and you're welcome to one. I'm like, Okay, so he gave me this folding 5x7 camera, which I can find a lens for. And the 5x7 camera I have doesn't fold up. This one does. And the bellows actually look like they're intact. And even if they're not, even if there's pinholes in the bellows, you can always drape your black dark cloth over top of them at the moment of exposure. So I said, well, thank you. And I ended up going to this museum and this gallery, seeing and meeting the owner and walking away with a 5x7 camera, which I later found out isn't a 5x7 camera. I was at home, I had returned, and when I looked at the ground glass, I thought, it looks bigger than 5x7. And I realized, I took a measure, it's 6.5 by 8.5. It's a whole plate camera. And there are film holders made for whole plate, and I could cut x-ray film down and use it. So I think I'll probably end up doing that. I have to order a film holder for 6.5 by 8.5. So it's even bigger than 5x7. But it was such a little thrill for me to say, I just walked into a museum that wasn't open and walked away with a wooden camera. I'm just fascinated by the ability of what you can get if you just ask. If you just reach out to people. Everything is accessible. Everything is available. We sometimes think that the world says no, and the no means no. And in the world of creativity, what can you get access to even if it's not open? What can you ask? And I always say, if you ask, the worst you can get is a no. And you already have that before you get started. So ask. You don't know what you might find and what you might see, what you might walk away with, who you might meet. Even a 6x8 folding camera. All right, that's today's photography talk. If you're enjoying these, hit the subscribe button. If you can support, hit the Patreon. Thanks to all my supporters. I appreciate you. I'll be back next time. We'll talk more photography. As always, here's the good light.